Since the pandemic, racially charged attacks on Asian Americans has multiplied. Last week, a man was attacked in Los Angeles' Koreatown. He was struck in the face, claiming his assailants told him that he has the China virus and go back to China. Thursday, surveillance video captured a man being stabbed in the back in Manhattan. In New York, Asian Americans gathered this weekend to rise up against anti-Asian hate.
We're tired of being scapegoated for many of the problems of the pandemic. We're tired of being ignored.
It's been escalating, because of what we've been hearing and seeing in the political arena, and with the coronavirus, and putting a lot of the blame on us when it's not us, it's not our fault, but we're paying the price.
We are sadly seemingly an easy target.
This is not a way to live, to walk with our backs against the walls, always, in fear. Something must be done.
And with me now, CNN legal analyst Shan Wu. Shan, so good to see you. You wrote a very powerful CNN.com op-ed this week calling for prosecutors to charge anti-Asian violence as hate crimes. So help people understand why that distinction is so important and why it is so difficult to prosecute under the current heading of hate crimes.
Thanks for having me, Fred. It's important because it's more than just a crime. It's a hate crime, meaning it's motivated by racist hate, and that hate itself needs to be held accountable. That's what the laws are for. And the history of violence against Asian Americans in this country is really important because many people don't realize this, but there's a long history of violence against people of color, including Asians, that has been under-prosecuted, dating back to the 1800s, where massacres occurred, lynchings, and no convictions resulted. Even in the 1980s, the very well-known tragic case of Vincent Chin, where he was prosecuted at the state level, his defendants got a very light sentence, and the federal civil rights charge ultimately failed. It did not result in convictions.
So under-prosecuted in many cases and also under-reported. We heard that from former NBA star Jeremy Lin yesterday where he said, culturally it may be very difficult for a lot of people to report the crimes, and thereby there isn't sufficient documentation of how often this is happening, but it's clear right now it is being magnified and multiplied too many times over.
Yes, that's so true, Fred. Particularly, oftentimes, not just in immigrant communities, but in underprivileged communities, people of color living there, there is an uneasiness with law enforcement. With some immigrants coming from countries where law enforcement may have been, very oppressive, they're afraid to report that. So a lot of outreach needs to be done there to make the community comfortable with being able to report these crimes. So that's a very important part of that outreach. And then once it's reported, then prosecutors have to step up and charge the hate crime.
Yeah. This is very personal for you. You've dealt with discrimination growing up in the U.S. Talk about your own experiences, how that informs, what you are seeing right now, and even your worries about your family members today, including your daughters.
Well, when I was a child, I was bullied on the schoolyard. And even though my own father was a New York City Human Rights Commissioner, it still really hurt my self-esteem. I remember saying to my mom, I hate being Chinese. I think a big part of why I went into boxing as an amateur was to kind of get at those insecurities. And seeing this happen today, it's a historic issue, it's a current issue, and it's very stressful, as you heard from the reporting. I mean, thinking about my own family, my children being out on the streets, not knowing what might happen. That's the terrible strain of it, is not knowing where it may come from. And so important for people to come together on this. We can't allow any different races, different groups to be played off against each other. This is a hate problem, and we really have to unite around that.
Yeah, it's amazing and so upsetting that in such an abundance of, the stew and gumbo that we have in America, that we would also have this horrible scourge that just seems endless. Shan Wu, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Rick.
And we'll be right back.